marks the 50th anniversary of the Chevrolet Can-Am. On the 22nd of April, Swartkop's Raceway played host to a gathering of Chevrolet enthusiasts in support of a motoring icon that has its roots in saloon car motor racing. About 40 cars made an appearance to commemorate and share the day, many displaying their small block V8 engines.
It is not only a Can-Am weekend. It is not everybody that is so privileged to own an original Can-Am. Obviously, if you come here with your two-door Forenza, four-door Forenza, it doesn't matter. You are a CHEV Forenza fan, and I am just doing it for the love of it. That's all. And maybe there's somebody that we can learn from.
The idea behind the new Chevy performance car was simple. It had to beat the Ford Capri Piranha on the track. This is the story of South African ingenuity and the willpower and commitment of a few key individuals with a plan to topple Ford from its dominant perch in the local motor racing series.
Originally, there was only in 1973 100 factory units made for homologation purposes, and Basil van Rooyen was the brainchild. He phoned Bob Price's office. Like we all know, GM had a no racing policy. So it was knocking on a dead door, but he insisted to speak to Bob Price.
I was also driving a Piranha against the works one, and it took me a couple of months to get to beating them. During those months I was planning another car because it was getting boring, they were winning everything. And then I approached General Motors when I thought of this idea, when I learnt about a Camaro Z28 engine, great 5-litre engine, and then saw this beautiful little Vauxhall Forenza that looked like a small Pontiac GTO. So that gave me the idea, and off I went to GM and had to talk them into it.
He flew down to Port Elizabeth, and Basil said to him, "Bob, why is GM sipping on the rear tit where Ford's got the Piranha, killing everything and everybody? Reynolds got a Cordini," and he carried on like that. And he said to me, "Mr. Van Rooyen, so what do you have got in mind?" He said, "Let's take a lightweight body and put a V8 in it. We have it homologated and we make a race car."
He called up his chief engineer and introduced me to him. And he said, "Tell him what your plan is, Basil." So I went through it with him. I said, "What do you think of that?" said Bob Price. So he said, "I don't think it's going to work." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because the torque is much too much for the Forenza chassis." So I said, "What part of the chassis? The door hinges or the door locks?" But why I mention the door hinges and the door locks is when you turn a car into a driveway and the left wheel hits the bump first, that torque on the chassis twists it so much that the door locks and hinges become involved. At this stage, Bob Price said the chap could leave, and thanks very much for his advice. And he said, "How much do you want to build this car?" And I told him, "Plus you must give me an engine and a car," which he did.
He actually had to build the first prototype cars that was sent back to GM Port Elizabeth, where product development and the engineering department actually designed it, and in a record time they started building the first cars.
To work with people like Basil. You know, Basil, when you think about it, he at that time had to build this car. We had to build this car in like 5 weeks, and everybody was involved. We were working 10, 12-hour days and 8 hours over the weekends. That guy, Basil, was in the back of the car welding the wheel arches and helping us do the job. So he wasn't a guy just standing around.
The car had a nickname, the Ferrari Killer. Imagine for yourself, the car could do roughly about 120 km an hour in first gear. It came out with an M21 Munshi gearbox that had a 2.2 first gear ratio. And especially with the engine that was developed in America by GM, it was a Z28 Camaro engine.
When we spec'd the engine for this car, we chose the 69 spec engine with 4-bolt mains. And the Tonawanda engine plant found it difficult to build the engines because they were building 4,000 engines a day, and we came along and said, build us 103, and you don't have the parts. So we had to find the parts, and we got the parts, and the parts were put together, and they assembled the engines on their training line where they trained the operators. So we got our engines, and only due to Bob Price's just incredible ability, even Basil noted it. He said, you know, Price got this under the door. So 302, as a history, it's a remarkable engine because it was designed specifically for Trans Am racing in the USA. So interestingly, Chevrolet were the only people that actually stuck by the rules. Every single part number on every single component on the Z28 was then listed and given to their dealers, because the Trans Am Racing said, if you want to race this car, a privateer must be able to go into a CHEV dealer and buy the parts to race this car. Now Chevrolet did that.
And that was raced from 1969 till then, and it was so successful in America that they just took that whole package and imported it and fitted it into a lightweight body here in South Africa, and it was called the Can-Am.
A little bit of sort of tag-on information. The Forenza is the only car that I know that started out life with a 1250cc engine. It then got a 2.5, which is exactly twice the size of the original, and then got another engine that was twice the size of that in turn. It only had 3 engines in South Africa in its lifetime, and each one was double the size of the previous engine. So that's kind of unique. To get to homologation of the cars, we had the Motorsport Authority tell us that we had to build 100 cars, and they all had to be exactly the same. So the first checkpoint was in November of 1972, and the first car was built, and that's our number 2 car actually, because Jeff had the number 1 car.
Look, the car was basically a good car, in the way that GM had produced it and built it in a lot of respect. But you know, there's obviously engineering, race engineering to do on it, which is, you know, exhaust systems and braking and different wheels and tires and modifications to the transmission and differential. How we managed it in that period of time, I don't really know, but it worked out very well.
Nowadays, only very few of the original Can-Ams are in existence. However, there was no shortage of support on display from modified Forenzas with implanted Chevrolet V8s in homage to the original. This was also an opportunity for the more spirited, race-minded individuals to take to the track and put pedal to the metal. Keeping in mind that these cars are 50 years old, it was pleasantly surprising to see that some of the drivers did not restrain themselves. Spectators were treated to a true sense of V8 power of yesteryear, the sound that never fails to get the blood pumping. The Can-Am would prove to be the high point of performance machinery for over a decade and remains highly regarded among collectors and racing enthusiasts today. Every car has a story, and every owner shares a passion for an icon that had its roots in the early 70s. This was a time when many of the participants were still quite young and impressionable, and also a time when the price of such a car, namely 5,800 Rand, remained a distant dream. Here are just some of their stories.
I'm so fortunate to have my second one. I had number 96 long ago, and then I did this stupid thing by selling it when my sons were racing Westbanks. And I managed to find another one, which is number 72. I am so pleased to say that's in a very good condition. I've got many cars, old cars, and this is my favorite. I drove Fords until the day I drove a Chevy. And besides the thrill you get from the V8, everybody looks at it and says, wow, it's still in good nick. How did you manage to preserve it like that? I think there's 40 originals left in the country. So yes, I love my car. This car was actually raced at Dalton by some youngsters, and I managed to buy it from them and they took off all the bits and pieces, and I traced the guy that bought it, and for 3 years I was sitting behind him, and eventually he gave in, and I bought back all the bits and pieces, put it back where it belonged. I just wanted it back to original.
I've had 2 road-going cars. This one behind me is a ex-Dani Carrera, full bumper-to-bumper restoration. So it's been completely overhauled, but it's been standing for the past nearly 20 years. Now this is a big downfall of the Can-Ams. The people are storing them, and they're slowly rusting away. All the Can-Ams here today, I'm stunned. I can't believe there's more Can-Ams here than were originally built. But they're beautiful, all of them.
I had my first Can-Am from 1987 to the end of 2000, and I was crying that I sold it, and I found this one in 2010 and since been building on it. So it's a long project, but as you can see, I'm nearing the end of it. Another 2-3 weeks, then I'll be finished. The gearbox has been overhauled, the engine has been overhauled. It's just a matter of putting everything in place. Managed to get new bumpers, flickers, headlights, with all the parts that I sourced from America for the engine and all the parts from the UK. It's a couple of 100,000. It's maybe close to 1 million, really. Because I haven't only got this one, I've got another 2. So whenever I see a part that goes on eBay on auction, I'm there to bid.
I remember my dad taking me to see the car. I must have been, 8 years old or something?
We bought it at Big Boss Auto in Alberton.
And he took me with it and he said, what do you think? I was probably one of the deciding factors because, I was like, yo, this thing is super cool. He got the car and, I've grown up with my dad. He's very big into his classics. He still actually works on classic cars every day in his workshop there. And it's my dad's passion, and just grown up since I was a baby, going to car shows, drag races, and anything V8 is welcome. That pure raw grunt, you just don't get it in any other motor. I just love that sound.
All the years that I've been involved with Can-Ams, this is the most I've ever seen together. I didn't even know there were this many. In 1973 I was in boarding school, and I had a poster that stuck in my door, my cupboard door. I got quite a hiding because I wasn't allowed to have it. And I said to that teacher, one day I'm going to own one. And it's just been a passion of mine all the years. It's the looks, the performance. If you look at the statistics in 1973 when they were made, and you look at some cars today, they still can't run the same speeds, they can't do the same thing. We don't have radios in them. We've got 2 exhaust pipes in the back, and that is your radio, that's the sound. It's a thrill. You put your foot down and you feel that horsepower. It's amazing. It's something else, especially for a car that's 50 years old. Then there's the value, obviously. The value is very, very high now. The sad thing is it gets sold in Australia and England, and the guys reach very high prices for it. I'd say 1.5 million. I reckon about 1.5 million.
Another special treat for the day was the appearance of some of the individuals who played an important role in the birth of the car. Paul Clark was a young engineer working at General Motors in the 1970s. He kept the crowds enthralled with his account of the behind-the-scenes stories. Also on hand, Jeff Mortimer, a South African racing legend, who was instrumental in helping set up the first race cars, and finally a live video link from Australia with none other than Basil van Rooyen.
I reckon anything that you build, Ford will build something faster. So I said, well, I think that in this case you're wrong.
A special surprise awaited the crowds when several drivers slipped away to prepare their cars for a demonstration on the racetrack.
You will direct us on the grid who to go where.
Soon the roar of V8s filled the air, and although the cars were not officially racing, the crowds were certainly enthralled by the power and roar of that beautiful Chevrolet V8.
Yeah, it is an absolute ball to drive a car like this. My car, which I'm driving, got a 600 horsepower Chevy small block V8, and it goes very well. We are trying this year with one car, one driver, one season. win 2 different championships. The one is the HRSA, the Indian Championship in Pretoria, and then of course the Border Motorsport Championship down in East London. We're trying to do it this year for the simple reason because it's the 50th anniversary.
Now, these race cars may be old, but don't be fooled, because many of them are raced in historical racing series that are ongoing today. The sheer brute force of these cars was breathtaking. And after the break, we will get to know a little bit more about these machines and the racing drivers who drive them. Driving a Can-Am inspired race car is tantamount to taming the beast. And although the few laps were meant for display purposes only, it did not stop the racing drivers from delivering max output. Equally, the individuals behind these machines have interesting stories of their own.
My heart has always been with a Chevy Can-Am. And I remember in 1973 walking past the old Myers Motors in Cambridge Street, East London, and seeing a brand new Chevy Can-Am standing on the showroom floor for the exorbitant price of 4,500 Rand, and thinking, man, one day I'll have one of those. I saw in the old Auto Trader of the day, in about 2006, a CHEV Forenza. They called it a Can-Am, but it wasn't the genuine Can-Am, but it was the fastback Chevy. Well, we bought it, took it home, stripped it down because it had really horrible innards, and it was a mix-match type of motor car. Contacted a fellow called Willie Hepburn, famous racing driver for the last 60 years probably, and he said, bring the car to us. And by 2011, he'd completed what you see behind me. It was done in the flag car colors of its racing era, and it's a replica thereof, the tribute to Des Ali. And he raced a car which looks exactly like mine. In fact, it was also number A17 that he raced, so it's really a very good copy of what he raced. And we've had great fun with the car. Motorsport demands that we put silencers on these motor cars. I've refused, and it's a straight-through V8 exhaust that you hear when you start this car, as are most of the Can-Ams in this country. And just the sound of this motor car is enough to get your blood rushing. And of course, the V8 power in such a small, light coupe body is performance that is difficult to describe. It's a little monster. And having seen that CHEV in 1973 and deciding this is what I want, and having built this car, the appeal and the urge to go racing and the excitement of racing this car is just indescribable.
Also on hand was the man himself, Willie Hepburn, in his newly completed Can-Am race car, which he had only finished building the night before.
I don't remember where I got it, but I got just an empty shell. And then I put everything on my own in, the diffs change, the gearbox chain, the suspension is changed, all the mounting, radiator, everything is V8. And the engine is one that I took out my Opel record. I enjoy everything that races. I've been racing, I promise you, about 30 cars during my lifetime, and I've been racing for 55 years.
Willie is a man of 80 years, but this was no deterrent in slowing him down. Far from it, as was demonstrated by his late-breaking effort. Admittedly, this was his car's first outing, but clearly Willie did not get the memo about the day being a display and not a race.
And it's nice to see everybody is still into the old V8s and stuff. Everything is going towards all the modern V8s, and the old ones are still the best, and it runs in the blood. And it's nice to be here and to see all the old guys like Willie and them still at it, still throwing the car around. And it's awesome to see. Well, to drive this one without tires today was quite hectic, because if you get on the brakes, the car starts snaking. So I was just running through the gears, and heel and towing and put it into a lower gear to get it around the corner. Otherwise, it will just spin out. The torque is too is too much actually in any gear to get around the corner. So, yeah, playing with the gears to float it around the corner was quite interesting. It's like part of your DNA, you know. If you invest 4 years into a car and assembling it yourself, every nut and every bolt that's in the car I did myself with my brother-in-law's help every now and then. But yes, it's like your child, you know. It's family. It's part of you. What you saw here today, starting up a car after 20 years and taking it around the track, I don't think anybody is crazy enough to do something like that. Well, it has been done today, and the only thing that didn't work is the battery. So I'm quite proud of what went into the car. There's not even an oil leak on it, not even a hydraulic leak, nothing. After 20 years standing in a garage, it's quite good.
After all the red mist moments had subsided, the race cars slowed and formed up for a formation lap. By this time, the crowd had gathered on the pit wall to witness what was truly an auspicious moment and a culmination of a day that will not be easily forgotten, and real insight into the 3 race cars and 2 rally cars that were successfully campaigned by Chevrolet. The overall success of the day can be attributed to the efforts of the event organizer, Rudolf de Vos. Besides the obvious power of the race cars, it was stated by General Motors that in standard form, the Forenza Can-Am developed 290 horsepower, or about 217 kilowatts. But word has it that the actual power was far in excess of that.
I could do 0 to 100 in that car repeatedly in 4.5 seconds. First gear, get it off the mark. Second gear, you'd get to a quarter mile in 13 seconds. It means you're getting to 100 miles an hour in 12 seconds. And that was 1972. And you ask, what does that feel like? Wow.
When you build a race car according to the historic rules, you only allowed what the car originally weighed. That was about 1120. And so you only allowed 90% of that. So the car is not that light like a car that can weigh up to 500-600 kilograms. It's still a heavy car, but it's incredible good feeling to drive the car. It is not that easy because it's got a very short wheelbase. So it's not that easy, but if you get out of that car, if you haven't got a smile in your face, you haven't got a heart.